My name is Brian Grossman. I'm executive editor at the Colorado Springs Business Journal. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming this evening. We're lucky to have this opportunity to get together every month and learn from our city's amazing CEOs, business owners, and leaders. We want to thank you for supporting the business community and the Business Journal. We're so grateful for the support of our sponsors who make these events possible. We appreciate our ongoing partnership with Phil Long Dealerships. They're back for their fourth year as the top sponsor of COS CEO. Phil Long, yes, let's hear it for Phil Long. Phil Long has a deep history in our city and an even deeper commitment to its growth and development. Also joining us this year as a sponsor is Rodney Gillette Jr. It's his first year. He's a gold sponsor, and he's owner of Firma IT Solutions. El Pomar Foundation, I see some El Pomar folks. They're a special sponsor, and they've supported this program in the past. This year, they're bringing emerging leaders, who I also met today, to the series to meet and learn from inspiring leaders. Our other sponsors include Notes Live, a local national business supporting the arts and live music, as well as perennial sponsor Stockman Cass Ryan and Company. Congratulations to SKR and Company. They just opened a Denver office this week, and they provide the best accountants for business needs. Let's hear it for our amazing sponsors. Now help me welcome Gina Sacrapanti, Chief Communications Officer with Phil Long Dealerships, to introduce Greg and to tell us more about Phil Long, which is celebrating 78 years in Colorado and decades of philanthropic work for our communities. Gina.
Thank you, Brian. I want to say also thank you to the team at the Colorado Springs Business Journal, to Amalgre, our wonderful host for this evening, and to our fellow sponsors for making this series happen, and to you for being here. In my role, I do have the unique privilege to work with a network of businesses and nonprofits that spans over 1,400 employees, all committed to a mission to be the best they can be. For over 78 years now, Phil Long Dealerships has been very proud of its philanthropic impact and in serving Coloradans from Mount Carmel Veterans Service Center, which our CEO founded, to Mount Carmel Wellness and Community Center in Trinidad, Colorado, and Sister Blandina Wellness Gardens, also in Trinidad, Colorado. You know, most people know about Phil Long Dealerships, but I'd like to talk about really what we do in the community during these events and how we support local nonprofits. So first, a little interesting thing that you may or may not know is that the Phil Long family of dealerships is part of Phil Long Enterprise. And about 2 weeks ago, we opened a Hilton Garden Inn in Trinidad, Colorado. So when you say, oh, we're a car business, we're actually a lot more than that. But again, it's the success of our dealership group that allows us to invest in the community and spur economic development across southern Colorado. You might have seen in the news recently that one of our dealerships, Phil Long Kia, their parts and service department was caught on fire at the end of July. And when we talk about, again, creative solutions and how do we go about with business, you know, we are still without power in that dealership. But what we've done in the traditional kind of making lemonade out of lemons is that our team had a really genius idea is that, wow, we have a whole fleet of electric vehicles and they can power our operations. So if you want to see something kind of cool, go to our Phil Long Kia dealership and you will see a number of electric vehicles that are powering our electricity, our laptops, everything to make our business operations run. In our backyard last Saturday night, our Phil Long Ford of Chapel Hills put on a Cars Under the Stars movie night for area residents, and that was all to benefit Shield 616. And then looking forward to next month, or actually this month, our Phil Long Ford of Motor City is partnering with the Humane Society of the Pikes Peak region, and we have 2 people right here, woo-woo. And we're doing the Check the Chip Day for our residents that wants to come in and make sure that their information on their pets are accurate and up to date. But those are just kind of a few things that we aspire to do day in, day out. Now, I also see James here. Phil Long Dealerships also have had the pleasure to support Children's Hospital of Colorado. 2 years ago, we actually got behind a walk that all of our dealership employees participated in to raise awareness of childhood cancer. And so it is really my pleasure tonight to introduce our feature speaker, Greg, for leading that, because that is so important. And I know the funding for childhood cancer is not that large, so we're glad to be part of that. So on behalf of Phil Long Dealerships, I want to just thank you for helping us be the largest privately held automotive group in the state of Colorado, and for allowing us to do all the wonderful things we do in this community. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Greg. Greg Raymond's journey with Children's Hospital Colorado began over 2 decades ago. When he first joined the team, he was sharing a workstation with a coworker, using his background in construction and healthcare administration to help plan the community's first pediatric hospital. Today, he is the president of Southern Colorado Care System, which provides pediatric services at 5 locations in the state. I've been really humbled by the responsibility and the opportunities that I've had within this organization to meet the needs of our kids and their families throughout the entire country and internationally, but more specifically Southern Colorado, Raymond told the Business Journal last year, while adding his primary goal is keeping kids out of the hospital. Interviewing Greg will be the Business Journal executive editor, Brian Grossman. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming Greg Raymond.
Thanks, Gina. Hi, Greg.
Good afternoon, evening.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
What is it? Is it evening? We'll call it evening.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we'll start really easy. Why don't you tell us where you're from and how you made your way to Colorado Springs?
So I'm an Intermountain guy. I grew up in Utah, so just on the other side of the mountain, so I had to get used to figuring out how to orient myself, recognizing the mountains were on the other side. I grew up, the mountains were on the east side, now they're on the west side, so that took about 10 years to figure that out, but finally figured that out. As part of my upbringing in Utah, I was mentioned in the introduction, I grew up in a family business and also had an uncle that was a healthcare provider. And through my interactions with my uncle, thought, healthcare might be something that I want to do. And he opened my eyes to all of the good things and all of the challenges associated with being a provider. And based on my interactions with him, realized, maybe the provider side isn't how I want to be involved in healthcare. So had an opportunity to learn about different things and ultimately decided to pursue healthcare administration through a graduate degree at the University of Minnesota. Post-graduation, worked for a Catholic system based out of San Francisco. And long story short, kind of stumbled into Children's Hospital Colorado, and 23 years later, I'm still here.
In your interview, you said you had just gone into a hospital and asked an administrator to follow them around. Is that right? That's your first introduction?
Yeah, this is very literal. In my college town, I thought I might want to do healthcare. It was about a 150-bed hospital. I went and knocked on Rich Smith's door and said, Mr. Smith, you don't know me, but I want to be you, I think. So can I shadow you for the summer? And I did about a 2 month shadow of Rich. He's proved to be one of my mentors. Yeah. Very influential, obviously, in my career choice, but then also as a resource as I started my career.
Was there anything about that visit, or I guess the 2.5 months, that really jumped out and said, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Well, from a transparency perspective, it validated that I shouldn't be a provider because I observed a case and had to excuse myself and proceeded to pass out in the central core there. Yeah. Now, the good news is no one saw it. It was a hip replacement, if I remember correctly, and I knew things weren't going well, so I snuck out of the operating room. And I remember specifically there was a cart there that they bring the equipment up and the instruments up that have been sterilized. And I leaned over on that, and I've got a mask on, and I'm like breathing, and the next thing I know, I'm on the ground.
Okay.
And so...
And nobody saw that?
No one saw... Well, I get up and I look around and nobody's looking at me, so I'm like, okay. But I hit my chin on the way down, so I split my chin open. So I just took my surgical mask, moved it down over my chin, and no one was the wiser, so...
Yeah.
was great.
Good MacGyvering, like hooking up stuff to your cars. Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, talk about what happens at Children's Hospital.
Children's Hospital Colorado is a special place. It's a miraculous place. Miracles happen every day. And there's also very sad things that happen. And so what's really exciting to be associated with an organization like Children's is to ensure that you have the resources available to take care of any child, regardless of what they present with. Sometimes it's very acute, sometimes it's very minor. Sometimes these kids come from a stereotypical or a nuclear family. Sometimes they have the most heartbreaking background you could ever imagine. And to be able to be there for these kids at their greatest time of need and their family, however that's defined, is one of the most satisfying things that a pediatric hospital does for any community. And so to be associated with that and the work that goes on there really is humbling. It is very mission-oriented, and it's what motivates me to do what I do.
Okay. Can you talk about your responsibilities specifically?
As the president of our Southern Colorado region, and I'm not trying to elicit laughs, really it's to get out of the way.
Yep.
To surround myself with the best and the brightest, empower them with either the resources they need or the structures that they need to accomplish what they have dedicated their careers to, dedicated their clinical aspirations to, and really let them thrive. And that looks different on every single day. You know, I have to tell this story.
Sure.
About what do I do. So years ago, and my wife's here, and she will probably remember this, my oldest was, 6, 7 years old in school. Saturday morning, I just want to sleep in, and I wake up, and his head's right there. And the first thing he says, do you remember this story, Colette? The first thing he says to me is, guess what Johnny's dad does? It's Saturday morning, I just want to sleep in, and he's going to tell me how cool his friend's dad is. Yeah. I don't know, what does Johnny's dad do? He makes video games. So how do I compete with that?
You can't.
Right? So I was a bit at a loss of words, and I said, well, Peyton, what do you tell him that I do? And he said, I actually get emotional about this. I don't know why, because I've told this story so much I shouldn't. But he said, well, I tell people that you make kids and their parents happy and you give presents to doctors. And I said, well, that's probably not too far off.
Yeah.
I think the presents from doctors came because we'd just done a t-shirt handout, and he knew I was like going in the middle of the night to hand out t-shirts. But that was, at the end of the day, it's making people leave happier than when they come, hopefully.
Yeah. Do you wish you made video games?
A lot of times.
Yeah.
You know, I've got members of my leadership team here and other people from the hospital, and there's a lot of days that are really rough, and if we could just flip on a video game and decompress for a minute, that would go a long way.
Let's talk about rough stuff. When did you guys open?
We opened May 29th of 2019.
19. So you had a whole year, not even, before COVID hit. How did COVID impact what you do, and what did you guys learn from it?
So the impact to us was interesting. So when the surge initially hit, the COVID surge initially hit, you may remember kids weren't getting sick. They were out of school. They weren't playing sports, so the injuries were minimized. They weren't necessarily outside in friend groups jumping over chain link fences or playing in the dirt getting sick or things like that. So we actually found ourselves not that busy when the adult hospitals were bursting at the seam. And we as an organization were faced with the dilemma of what do we do with our workforce? We don't have the kids in the hospital to justify all of these FTEs.
Yeah.
So it was a very deliberate decision by the organization that we were going to protect paychecks, we were going to protect jobs, and that came at a significant expense. But that was our commitment to ensure that our team members had the opportunity, one, to weather the pandemic financially, but then also have the assurances that they had gainful employment and that they were a valued member of an organization that acknowledged and recognized the expertise and the commitment that they had made to us and to the kids. So that was very important. That came and went, and then kids started to get a little bit more COVID, and our average daily census of kids with COVID grew, not exponentially like in the adult world, but then life started to return to normal, and kids started being kids, whether that was at school, whether it was in the neighborhood, whether it was sports. And we had an unprecedented respiratory disease surge throughout the country, throughout the world, and Colorado Springs was no exception to that. So if we look at the incidence of RSV nationally, Colorado averaged about 2 times that rate. And that introduced a burden of need that we really struggled to keep up with. And so we were very dependent on what's called contract or traveling nurses to help respiratory therapists, others that were critical to ensuring that we had access to provide that level of care. Our clinical teams were extremely creative, sometimes entrepreneurial in how we thought about our spaces within the hospital. Dr. DeStefano is here. He's our chief medical officer. There are multiple conversations that we had and different initiatives that he led with the medical staff and our nursing leaders of how creative can we get to place a child in this location and provide the level of care that we would expect if they were our own kids. Mm-hmm. And we were able to do that. And so, long story short, throughout COVID and then the subsequent respiratory surge, it was valuing our workforce and trying to retain them. It was managing care in locations that were atypical, including a tent outside of our ED in the event that our ED was overrun with volume. We'd have an alternate location. Mm-hmm. And really thinking about spaces that were reserved when we designed and built the place to then be transitioned to inpatient care when that wasn't the original intent. So a lot of creativity. I would almost call it disaster preparedness and response. And so we'll use these lessons as an organization as we plan future programs, as we build new facilities. Yeah. If there's a silver lining in any of that, it's we learned shortcomings in how to respond to disasters or public health emergencies differently.
Now that COVID is over, right?
Now that COVID is over.
Yeah. All right. So what are some challenges facing healthcare in general these days? And are there unique challenges because you are working with children?
I hope people have heard about the workforce challenges. As we went through the pandemic and people really started to evaluate what their priorities are, like every industry, healthcare was challenged with people who prioritized proximity to family, work-life balance, focusing on things that may be more of intrinsic value to them than a paycheck. And we lost people. And like every organization, we struggled with how to train, attract, recruit, ultimately retain those individuals. I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge. Yeah. As we look at the workforce going forward, there's a lot of new individuals that are interested in becoming healthcare providers, whether they're physicians or nurses or pediatric pharmacists or whatever it may end up being. But it's not outpacing those that have left or plan to retire. Mm-hmm. And so we've got it in imbalance. And one of the challenges in healthcare is that the interest of individuals going into healthcare careers is there. What we lack is the faculty to teach and to train them. And so what are we doing to develop the faculty to advance that next generation? That being said, we've brought on more new graduate nurses into our organization in the past 18 months than we have in any other time in our organization's history. So we're trying to do that, but we have to orient them. Something that's unique to pediatrics, when a nurse gets done with his or her training, they don't step into a clinical role and start taking care of 23-week-old neonates, a baby that can fit in your hands. For a nurse to transition to the NICU and to be able to provide care on their own, that's about a 12-month process. So we have to bring them on board post-graduation, then orient them. Different units have different orientation times, but that's just one example that's unique from a workforce perspective. That's unique to pediatrics.
How are you going to grow with the city? We're growing pretty fast. Well, in the county even, because you're sort of it.
Yeah, well, and our catchment area is one that spans all of southern Colorado, reaches into western Kansas, New Mexico, even in the panhandle of Texas sometimes, and Arizona. And so we really have to be mindful of all of that growth. Mm-hmm. Soon after we opened, Penrose St. Francis made the decision that pediatric health care, so not neonates, they still have a neonatal intensive care area, but pediatric care in an inpatient setting was not their priority anymore. And so we opened in May, and they approached me in October and said, hey, we're closing our unit in I forget how much notice it was. It wasn't very long, within a month. And so that actively triggered the build out of any shelf space that we had.
Yeah.
So for our expansion of inpatient or clinical space to take place, it requires construction, bricks and mortar, and that's very expensive. One of the other challenges with healthcare is cost, and we've got to rein in cost. So what are we going to do about that? Really, we have to focus on keeping kids out of the hospital or receiving care in a location that's most appropriate for what they need. You know, you don't need to come to the emergency department for an earache. That being said, I'm a parent, and if my kid has an earache at 10 o'clock at night and I'm trying to get in bed, it feels like an emergency, right? Mm-hmm. So what options exist out there after hours? You know, why can I access a pediatric urgent care, or can I access a primary care office that can help me manage those types of things? Mm-hmm. Especially if I'm a first-time parent, I'm going to struggle with that. And so we need to continue to grow. We've developed a master facility plan for our location. It's very expensive. We will continue to evaluate that and look at making those targeted investments here in Colorado Springs. But we've also developed, with the help of philanthropy, new locations outside of an acute care hospital. So we refer to it as our Telstar location, which was significant. The realization of that facility really was enabled by philanthropy and community partners that really believe in our mission and believe in the programs that we put in that facility. So we'll make those targeted investments outside of the stereotypical hospital that's much more visible as you're driving around.
Okay. Sort of related, in your, excuse me, it's contagious. In your interview, you had talked about, well, I'll read the quote here. It says, "We need to address the social detriments of health and ensure that equity, diversity, and inclusion are part of that." One thing you sort of hear frequently in Colorado Springs with healthcare is we have healthcare deserts. Southeast would be one of those. All the facilities are being built to the north where maybe cynical people would say that's where the money is. What do we do about your quote there? How do we address that?
Yeah. The biggest opportunity for pediatrics is access to primary care. So Children's Hospital of Colorado does not hire pediatricians or family practice docs. That really is an opportunity for large group practices or individuals to set up those practices. There's some financial realities of running a primary care practice that really motivate the individuals to find a balance in the types of patients they're able to take care of. Children's Hospital Colorado, it's critical to our mission. We take care of kids regardless of their ability to pay. People in this room may be surprised to learn that over 70% of the kids that we take care of pay for their care through a government-sponsored plan. Yeah. Over 50% of that's Medicaid, and 20% is TRICARE, the benefit plan for our active and retired militaries. And so with that comes the likelihood that it's very difficult here in Colorado Springs for us to break even. Mm-hmm. And so the cynical person that says, hey, maybe they're up where all the payers are, we're actually up north where the payers are because we had a great opportunity to co-locate on the Memorial North campus to have a greenfield and have the ability to reduce the amount of money we had to spend by leveraging the resources that already existed on that campus, like a central utility plant, like a food service, lab, doc, those types of things. We were able to build more hospital because we didn't have to duplicate all of those services in another location. And so the big opportunity for us is around prevention and partnering with the primary care community. And one of the things I already mentioned, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Mike DiStefano, who's here with us, really is working with those providers to ensure access. You know, one of the things that we are challenged with right now, that if you were a TRICARE beneficiary you would appreciate, is within the military health system or the Defense Health Agency programs, there's a lack of pediatricians in Colorado Springs right now to take care of our military kids. The result of that is those kids end up in our emergency department, disproportionately so. And so it's striking that balance on how do we keep kids out of the hospital by giving them immunizations, getting back to school physicals or sports physicals, having timely appointments for that earache so that at 10 o'clock at night you've had enough and you just drive to an emergency department and get a bill that you don't want to pay, and it's expensive to go to the emergency department. We all know that.
Your goal is keeping kids out of the hospital. You can't really prove a negative, so how do you measure success?
Well, we can definitely look at utilization by different
Sure.
groups, right? And we have pretty sophisticated electronic medical records which allow us to track patients that have been in the system.
Yeah.
We have partnerships with community practices where they're able to leverage our electronic medical records, so we have primary care data as well to help assess that. And one of the big opportunities that we continue to look at in addition to primary care is what are we doing from not just a physical health perspective, but a mental health perspective. Mm-hmm. I already referenced the Telstar location, and a lot of that is focused on behavioral health services for kids. And so if we're managing both the physical health perspective from a prevention point of view, as well as mental health resources and empowering community providers to do that, that's going to go a long way to keeping kids out of the hospital, whether it's self-destructive behaviors that they're thinking about, talking about, whether they take action on that or not, making sure that we have the resources to care for those kids that are, before they get in a healthcare crisis or behavioral health crisis, is going to go a long way towards keeping kids out of the hospital as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about leadership. This is COS CEO leadership lessons. So did you always feel like you were supposed to be a leader? Is that something you grew into?
So I had a great role model. One of the most accomplished people I know has never cashed a check in her life, and that's my mom. So in addition to raising 7 kids, she was the alumni president for her alma mater. She was appointed by the governor to be a state regent. She raised money for the local opera house, and on and on. And so when I was young, I was always ticked off that when I came home from school, my mom wasn't there. But I never went without. I still had warm oatmeal in the morning when I left. And I didn't realize until later what she was doing and how important that was. And she really role modeled how being a mom and being a professional can coexist. It just so happened that all of her work was volunteerism. And so from a young age, I observed her and saw how she invested in the community, saw how she branched out, how important education was to her. And it was almost always in leadership roles. Yep. Never with a formal title other than alumni president and being a regent. And so she would come home and she would say, I was just on the search committee for the new for the new university president. And, in high school, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Now I know there's a little more gravitas to that than I gave to it. Yep. And so that was my first initial opportunity to observe a leader. Because of that and really being involved in team sports growing up, I kind of evolved into that. And team sports were very influential to me as well in working with others and formal leadership and informal leadership and coaches and roles and all of that. And I think that really helped me as well. And then I had a really unique experience of the Mormon faith, if you're familiar with that. And so I served a church mission, spent 2 years in Romania. And I went to Romania in May of 1993. If you follow world history, December of 1992 is when Romania killed their dictator, if you remember that video. And so I spent almost a complete year just setting up the infrastructure for our missionary organization in a foreign country, in a foreign language. And that really provided a lot of leadership opportunity. I was 19 years old, meeting with In fact, I went on a live TV show when I was 20 years old in Romania and talking about religious freedom. I don't even know what I said.
Was it in Romanian? Do you speak Romanian?
Sigur că da.
Oh, I guess so.
Yeah. So I had these experiences that I think really challenged me to think, hey, how can you leverage these experiences at a young age, whether it was observing my mom or being in Romania or being on a live TV show, to be a leader? And I think about my experience playing basketball and football, and I think it all kind of culminated in, this is something I think I enjoy, and let's jump into it and see if I can be successful.
This isn't in my notes, but why do you speak Romanian?
Because if you want to eat, you better figure out how to ask for bread.
Okay.
And so I didn't know Romanian until I got there.
Until you got there.
Yeah, but I was there for 2 years, and I was hungry, so I had to figure out I need some bread.
Okay. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I spoke to it a little bit earlier, and really it's to surround, and it's kind of cliche, but I really focus, it's really surround yourself with the best and the brightest. And being associated with Children's Hospital Colorado, that has a formal affiliation with the CU School of Medicine, I walk hallways with geniuses. And geniuses that have the biggest hearts that you would ever imagine. I mean, these are individuals who have self-selected into pediatrics and further self-selected into academics and then further self-selected into pediatrics. So the most compassionate, brightest individuals you could ever imagine. That's inspiring. Mm-hmm. I mean, if nothing else, you don't want to be embarrassed. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's motivating to know that you've got this bandwidth of expertise and in my case, our case at Children's Hospital, compassion and vision, that's really inspiring.
So you talked about the influence your mom played and how that sort of developed your sense of leadership. Do you think your leadership style has evolved?
Oh, a lot.
How so?
I was able to do a program at Center for Creative Leadership years and years ago before I lived in Colorado Springs. And I had this perception of myself that was reflected in the 360 feedback from my direct reports and from my boss. But the feedback from my peers was not even close to how I thought I showed up. And so I had a kind of a moment where my self-awareness is pretty low, or it's lower than I would like it to be. And so through that engagement and coaching and other types of feedback, I've really tried to grow my self-awareness so that I could tailor my leadership appropriately to the teams that I'm working with, or the individual, depending on what it may be. Mm-hmm. And that has gone a long way. I'll just share with you one more experience. So our now system CEO, she pulled me aside years ago, and she said, "Hey, Greg, I want to give you some feedback." And if you know her, she always makes things positive. So I think she was trying to distract me with a compliment while saying, "You're missing the mark." But what she said to me is, in a meeting, I had a habit of pulling out my phone, and this was long ago, it was probably a flip phone or maybe a BlackBerry, I don't know what it was, when I was bored, and that was my go-to. And she's like, "Greg, do you know you do that? And do you know the impact it has on the meeting?" And I'm like, "I do that? Well, I guess it's probably not very good if we're talking about it," type of thing. And then the compliment came as, "Well, I think the reason why you're doing it is because you process information very quickly, you've already arrived to where the group's going to get, and so you're just waiting for them to get there." And that's her nice way of saying, "Hey, you're not showing up the way you want to, but trying to give me a compliment, I think, at the same time." Yeah. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I didn't want to show up that way. I didn't want people to think I was disengaged. And it was all because, I had that phone that was a convenient way to distract myself. Yeah. And so tailoring leadership and self-awareness, I think, go hand in hand. I need to know how I'm showing up. I need to know the impact that I'm having or not having. Isn't it the desired one, and being able to pivot? So.
You talked about your first mentor, at least in the field, the person you approached and asked to shadow. How important is mentorship, especially in a field as complicated as medicine?
So let me talk about Rich Smith a little bit more, that first mentor. So when I was shadowing him around, he would walk around to the hospital, and from my perspective, I don't know, it probably wasn't the case, but back then, it seemed like he knew everybody's name. And he would be like greeting them by name and all that, and I'm behind him going, "I am terrible with names. I am never going to be successful." And what I realized is that he had a gift for that I don't possess, but the name was not as important as making them feel acknowledged. And so that really stuck with me. So one of the things that I do, and Dr. DeStefano's probably observed it, is regardless who comes in the office, I try to get out of my chair and go at least acknowledge them. Yeah. And I didn't even realize the impact it has, and it wasn't purposeful. I was just kind of doing what I always do. But one of our environmental services or housekeeping team members came in, and she's the one that would normally take the garbage out. And it's usually at the end of the day, I may be the only one there, and she'll come in and she'll be like, "Is your garbage full or not?" I'm like, "No." And I just started talking to her. And she came in the next day and talked to our executive assistant and said, "Who is that?" And she goes, "Oh, that's," I don't know what she said, "the big boss," or something like that. And unbeknownst to me, she'd already announced that she was leaving to move back to, I think, Alabama or somewhere in the South, close to family. And she proceeded to give our executive assistant feedback that, why would he talk to me? Why does he care? And I'm so sad that I'm leaving. She was leaving for personal reasons. I'm like, well, I guess that was my intent, but it just goes to show what Rich taught me. Just make a small little investment in somebody, and it will go a long way. Mm-hmm. And I wish she was still here. Again, she had her own family reasons for leaving, but that's very meaningful feedback that I made her feel important, and she is. Because Dr. DeStefano is a slob, and she had to clean up after him every day.
That might lead into this next question, I'm not sure. You have a magic wand, but the batteries are almost dead, so you only have one wish. What do you, or wanding, what do you use it on here in Colorado Springs?
You asked about it earlier, and it really is, what are those social determinants of health? And how do we as an organization make sure that they're the same for everybody? Mm-hmm. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different socioeconomic backgrounds. We all have different family support backgrounds. We all have different access to resources. That shouldn't determine the success of a 3-year-old. Yeah. And it does today. Yeah. So if I had that magic wand, that's a big wish, but it's either to get rid of social determinants of health or to normalize them across all of our different populations.
Okay. Last question, and then we'll see if we have any audience questions. It's your high school graduation day. What advice do you give yourself?
Well, you stumped me. At my high school graduation, because I'm a slight introvert, I think most people perceived me either as very shy or very cocky. Yeah. And I think the advice that I would give myself is realize your strengths, realize your weaknesses, acknowledge them, grow from them, and don't be susceptible to labels. And I think that I lacked some confidence in social settings coming out of high school. It's interesting, in high school, I'll fast forward, in college, I was much more comfortable shooting a free throw in front of 10,000 people than I was chit-chatting at happy hour. Mm-hmm. I'd rather do that. And so I still struggle with that a little bit, and I've worked on my being an introvert and managing that. But really the advice would be, hey, you're going to be fine. You can grow, you can get outside your shell, and you can be successful. So yeah. The successful part's still a question mark. I'm successful in life. I've got a great wife. I've got a great family, and still trying to measure success professionally, but we're making some inroads, and we're really proud of what Children's Hospital of Colorado has done here in Southern Colorado.
Great. Do we have any questions from the audience? We can come to you with a microphone.
I have a question. Greg, what's your favorite thing to do when you're not at work?
Oh, can I get you on the mic?
I can repeat that. We are recording, but it's what is your favorite thing to do when you're not at work? Shooting free throws, I think. But.
I haven't played basketball since COVID. I'm worried about my Achilles at this point in my life. Yeah. So a couple things. One, just being with my family, enjoying those relationships. We're all together for the first time this summer in 2.5 years, so that's been great this summer. But I like to be physically active. My wife and I recreate together. It's a great stress relief for me. Exercise and getting a good sweat and doing all that goes a long way for my mental health. And so if I'm not at work, I'm either hanging out with my family or playing tennis or golf or on the lake or skiing, something like that.
Any other questions? I saw a flash of a hand. Yeah.
So, Greg, with your time at Children's, can you think of a situation that's been the most memorable for you whether that be with a team member or with a family that you've been a part of serving?
There's a lot of them. I mean, they happen on a daily basis. I think one of the things that I really enjoy, and those of you that haven't been in the hospital, is where I office is down the hall from the atrium. And this is going to sound weird, but when I hear a kid that's losing it in the atrium, and it just kind of echoes, I like that for some reason. It makes me realize, hey, this is a kid's hospital. This is different. And there's nobody over there hushing the kid. There's nobody telling them to be quiet. You know, maybe their parents are, but no one else is annoyed by it. I mean, that's what we deal with every day. So it's that nice connect to mission moment every so often. Or when they come down and they're lost looking for the restroom, I get a kick out of, telling a 3-year-old where the bathroom is. And just kind of, I don't know.
You are a hero.
That's one thing. Another one that I'll share is, I still look back on this and just kind of shake my head. And this was years ago. So I was working at our Anschutz campus in Denver, working for a very specific surgical program. And the surgeon in chief and I were meeting with a donor who had a specific interest for this targeted program. And Dr. Ziegler and I are like, hey, if we can get $250,000 from this donor, this is going to be significant changes for this clinical program. So we brought this individual in and we met with him. And we're sitting there talking. And before I even throw out a number on what a gift, details of what $250,000 could do, he says, well, Maury and Greg, how about $250,000? And I'm just like, and then he goes, per year for 5 years. And that was like my real first experience in working with a community member that was fully aligned with what we were doing. And it went from, hey, $250,000 is going to have a huge impact, to $1.25 million. And I said, what is going on that would get someone aligned to make a gift like that? Not unsolicited, but, and it really highlights the role a children's hospital plays in communities. Whether it's the Denver community or now Colorado Springs, a children's hospital is a part of the community, it's part of the fabric. And so when I think about memorable experiences, there's a lot of them, but I just think about that philanthropic experience with that individual, and it opened my eyes to the role that a pediatric hospital plays, because I was very young in my career, and it made me reposition how I viewed the role of a pediatric hospital in a community like ours.
Do we have any other questions? We do?
Sorry. Can you talk more about how different pediatric care is to caring for adults, and how having a dedicated pediatric hospital changes outcomes and the healthcare landscape in a city?
Yes, I would love to, because kids are not small adults. And because of that, there's a whole series of specialized providers at all levels, physicians to technicians and everyone in between, that's what they do. They dedicate their training and their career to these kids. One of the big differentiators that a lot of parents don't think about is pediatric anesthesia. You just don't slap a mask on a kid and hope they wake up. It's very specific, it's very scientific, it's very evidence-based. It is very anxiety-inducing for the kid and for the parents. Has anyone here been there when their child's been put to sleep? When I cried when that happened, because you go from a kid who's 100% there to a kid that is totally out and is unresponsive. And you realize what it would be like to lose them. And so that's just one example. Dr. DiStefano is a pediatric emergency medicine physician. I've watched him. If I go to the emergency department, they take care of me. Dr. DiStefano takes care of a family. That is significantly different. And that family may be a mom and a child, or it may be an extended family plus people that are in the waiting room wondering what's going on. And so those are just a couple of different examples. From the outcomes perspective, we're victims of our own success. We had this conversation on Monday. There's a lot of kids today that when I grew up, the life expectancy for a lot of pediatric diseases, my peers didn't live through high school. Now they're living well into an adulthood. And so how do we partner with adult providers to transition those kids from pediatric specialists and pediatric care to now adult care and having access to the specialists that they need? Some of these specialists, Dr. DiStefano, may have got 2 months of pediatric experience in the area, and now they're being expected to take care of kids, now young adults, that they never expected they would when they went through their training. So that's another difference, is how do we do that? It's great news. You know, I've got a nephew who's a complex kid that 15 years ago wouldn't be alive. He's now a college graduate, and he's trying to figure out, how do I, as a double lung transplant and pediatric cancer survivor, how do I continue to be productive and successful in life and have access to the therapies and to the specialists that I need? So that's a great problem to have, but it's an opportunity that we as a healthcare institution nationally and internationally need to invest more time in to ensure that these families are taken care of. So a few examples. Dr. D, I'll put you on the spot. Anything you'd add to that? You shouldn't have come, sorry.
I was hoping you'd just elaborate on the geniuses that you get to work with. And it's not me, if y'all know me, it's other people. I think, when you think about outcomes within pediatrics, what people don't realize is the degree of training that an individual goes through for pediatric specialization. So myself, as a pediatric ER doc, it took 6 years after medical school to do that. Greg gave an example of emergency medicine physicians. They will have 2 to 3 months of training. And so while many of the non-pediatric specialists who take care of kids can do a lot of things really well, there's a lot that can go wrong in kids that if you're not in a pediatric center, the nurses, the doctors, the techs will not pick up on. And so while speaking about outcomes, we can go through multiple different outcomes, from surgical outcomes to not returning back to hospitals. And so I think as we think about it as a community, the benefit is really having a place where kids, one, are comfortable to get care in, the parents are comfortable to get care in, but more importantly, that they don't have to visit us as frequently because of the specialization.
Okay. Yep.
Any future plans to partner with our community schools and offer mental health resources to our kids within the school so they feel comfortable and vulnerable to share their concerns?
Yeah. Do you want to restate the question, or do you want me?
Oh, sorry, I didn't have
Partnering with schools, mental health, any plans?
We currently have a program called Healthy Kids, where that's a kind of a two-pronged approach, where we do have resources in the community schools, not all of them, which affords a couple of different opportunities. So one is resiliency coaching. So what that is in 6th grade, families have the opportunity to opt out from this program, which is a big difference rather than opting in. And it pairs health coaches with 6th graders to help with their resiliency as it relates to coping mechanisms, whether that's online bullying or in-person bullying or stressors at home or whatever triggers may be out there that have increased I think it's fair to say increased the behavioral health challenges that kids face. But I also think because of that, we've become more comfortable and reduced some of the stigmas, so we hear more about it as well, about things that we all may have dealt with, but it was, rub some dirt on it and go out and play types of things. Now we talk about it, which is a more appropriate thing to do. And then there's also the health navigators, and these are individuals, highly trained individuals that are embedded in schools that are focused on partnering with the school-based resources to help these kids when they need resources that exceed the capacity of the school-based therapists or counselors that we may end up being. So really facilitating the transition from what I would call a school-based resource to more of a community-based one. So those are both in pilot phase. Both of those programs are funded by philanthropy. Again, significant investment by the community and support for that. And so, it's been rolled out in, I think we're in over 60 hospitals, 60 schools, both programs combined. And it's now being introduced into the Denver market as well. So.
Hi. So you've talked a lot about how you provide the care for the children and the patients that you have. What kind of programs or resources do you provide your employees so that we can ensure that we're taking care of the people who are taking care of children?
Team member resiliency is a bit of a buzzword as a result of the COVID pandemic and all that we had to deal with. And I think in healthcare, we've taken for granted the resiliency of our team members historically. In Children's Hospital Colorado, I think about from a resiliency perspective, there's a couple of things that we've done historically. So it's how do we motivate people to be healthy and put incentives in place for them to take care of themselves and do work-life balance. That's very individualistic, and it's very dependent upon people's willingness to jump in and do that. And then you have the other side of it is there's a traumatic event that happens in the hospital, and what resources do you have to support them as they themselves as caregivers grieve over what transpired, what they either participated in or experienced, or whatever their level of involvement may be. As we've gone through so that was the historical view. As we've gone through the pandemic, both of those things remain very important. But also then you have to add to it is we're asking people to do more, especially when there's workforce shortages. And so additional pay, additional time off, that only goes so far. We can give people as much time off as they want, and all it does is accrue because they don't have the ability to take time off. That's almost insulting, right? You're giving me more time off, but I can't take it. So as we think about resiliency, and our clinical team members have done a lot better. We have a full-time individual in our organization that focuses just on resiliency for the entire system, so all of our 16 locations up and down the Front Range. And in that role, she was so good she got recruited away by Stanford. And so we've recruited a new person, which is great, new fresh ideas. But how do we continue to do things that are beyond kind of the stereotypical bring in chairs and do massages, but it's something that's more lasting? One thing that we're really proud about is we have just started our journey for Magnet, which is a national accreditation for hospitals as it relates to nursing and caregiver environment and culture and things of that. Inherent in that is very targeted and specific resiliency measures and actions that we have taken. And so we look forward to highlighting that through that process. And so it's really multifaceted in how we do it. One thing I would be remiss if I didn't mention is team member safety. If somebody comes to work and they don't feel safe, that's a problem. And that could be everything from, hey, there's ice on the sidewalk, to if there's an active shooter in the hospital, I don't know what to do. And so what are we doing to equip our team members to be able to respond to, hey, there's ice demelter in the garbage can in the parking lot, to I know what I should do for my patients and what I know I should do for me if there's an active shooter, and everything in between from a team member safety perspective. It's disappointing that we have to talk about that, but I think there's just an article I saw recently, I think it was yesterday actually, that bad actors is the term that they used, acknowledge and recognize that universities and healthcare institutions are soft spots and targets because of that.
Do we have any other questions? 3, 2, 1. How about a round of applause for Greg? Thank you, Greg. I'll do my quick outro here. Once again, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to the sponsors, Phil Long Dealerships, Firma IT Solutions, El Pomar Foundation, Stockman, Cass, Ryan and Company, and Notes Live. Next month's COS CEO will be on Wednesday, September 13th. That's with Kevin Shaughnessy of Phil Long Dealerships. He's Executive Vice President and Partner. You can find ticket info at csbj.com/events. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.